Good morning. Sorry, really, running behind. Good morning. Hi.
Hello, lover.
Whew, okay, so we're here. We are talking today. We rewatched Hamilton 2 nights ago. If you haven't watched the filmed version of Lin-Manuel Miranda's the original cast's Hamilton, let me just encourage you to pay for a month of Disney and do that. Hold on one second. Oh, so much better. It's because I had a little lotion on my hands.
A little bit. I thought it looked a bit blurry.
A little blurry, a little shiny. I'm still very shiny, but that's all right. Anyway, we rewatched Hamilton because we're about to lose Disney, and I wanted to see it again. And first of all, you loved it even more the second time.
I did.
I think I did too. I'm going to try to watch it once more before we lose it because it's so dense that it's, wow, there's just no way that you could possibly walk away from one or two viewings and say, oh yeah, I understand all of the context. Oh my gosh. But the thing that struck me in rewatching it was this idea of legacy. Both Hamilton and Burr are obsessed with their legacy. And I think it's because they started out with very little. They were both orphaned young. They both did not come from prominent families. They did not have the status that Jefferson, that Washington, that Lafayette had. So they had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder or a little bit of insecurity. But they were really, legacy is a strong theme through the musical. And it made me wonder about what's your legacy? Do you even think about it? Because if you are struggling with an addiction of any kind, even something that's not going to kill you like alcohol or drugs has the potential to, then you aren't getting to define your legacy. Your legacy will be defined by your addiction. And I just think that's such a shame.
It is. It's. I mean, where we started thinking about this, and I thought about it, and my legacy could have been, very different than I hope it's going to turn out to be.
I was thinking about that too. How would Quinn and I talk about our years with you had you died an alcoholic and because of alcohol? We would talk about them bitterly. We would talk about how incredible you were when we first met you, and how either that wasn't who you were and you kept up a facade for a number of years, or you just lost yourself, and in that process lost us too. I've said, I know many times, I can't imagine who I would be if Maz had died from alcoholism. In part because I didn't know that's what it was. But I grew up in a kind of a funny household where marriage was a funny thing. I mean, my parents were married, but when they got divorced, my mother declared she would never get married again. And my dad has been happily married for 30 years this month. Oh gosh, today.
Oh,
I think 30 years today.
we have to get on that.
Yes, we do. Yesterday or today. Anyway, so I grew up thinking that I would never get married because I had no interest. Katharine Hepburn wasn't married. A lot of women that I admire were not married. My grandma didn't get married until 37, and was always kind of funny about marriage. So I had a fairly negative view of it. And this would have confirmed that for me. And I would have just thought, see, marriage might work for some, but it certainly didn't work for me. And I'm not saying to you that if something terrible happened to you today, I would jump right back on the marriage train. I probably wouldn't, but not because I have not. I'm now in a legacy of an amazing marriage. And that's because you did the work you needed to do. So you talk a little. I'm gonna drink some tea, and while you're breathing, thanks, Anne. That's very cute. For people who watch this later on YouTube, Anne wrote, "In my opinion, you always shine."
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, it's a tough thing. I was headed down the road of, you know, used to be a nice person, drank himself to death. That's not the legacy I wanted. You know, there was a point where I did give up, which is near the end of where it got bad for me, and knew I wanted to change but didn't think I could or should. Thankfully, got over that stumbling block. But like I am one of the lucky ones. There are many people who don't get this chance to, when you hit your bottom, to turn around and think, yeah, this isn't really what I'm supposed to be. Let's give this a go and see if it works.
Yeah. But the reality is that many of us, most of us, have the opportunity to actually pick how we want to move through the world, because most of us do not live in the grip of something that is far, far larger than us. So I guess the question for you is really just, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want people to talk about you? Our dear friend Julie Blem, who was a guest with us, I don't know, maybe in March or April, Julie and I were together sometime this spring, and she told me that when she was a student at Concordia in the early 70s, she had a really young religion professor who was super radical, didn't stay at Concordia very long. But he said something to her class which she has never forgotten, and which I have now told a lot. And it actually beautifully represents his point. He said to them, what if heaven and hell is just the way that you are remembered and talked about on earth? So if people are talking about you positively, then that's heaven. And if people are cursing you, then that is hell. And in the context of this conversation and talking about legacy, I wanted to share a story that I can't remember if I've shared this with you or not, but it bears repeating if I have. The day that Maz met with a social worker in the hospital to see what was going to be the next phase of his recovery, she asked me to leave the room, so I was already put out. But I was standing in the hallway. They were meeting in a little conference room in the hospital. And I was standing outside of a room, and a nurse was with a man who, you know, could have been our age but looked 75. It's impossible to know because alcohol and drug abuse does such terrible things to you long term. And his door was open, so I was just standing in the hall, and I heard this whole exchange. They were trying to find someone in his life who would come and pick him up. So at Sanford, at least 4 years ago, that floor that Maz was on it was an interesting floor. It was for both cancer patients and addicts going through withdrawal. And I don't know why those two were together, but it was a very interesting mix of patients. So I'm standing in the hallway, and this nurse says to the man, who should we call? And he says, call my daughter, here's her number. Okay, calls the daughter. Hi, this is the nurse from Sanford. Your dad's ready to be released. Could you come and pick him up? Oh, you're busy. Well, could you rearrange anything? Oh, you can't. Okay, well, we'll see about your brother. Okay, hang up, call the brother, same conversation. The nurse says to him, to the man, your children can't come. Anybody else? Yeah, call my cousin. They called 4 or 5 people. Nobody would come and pick him up. And the more no's he got, the more defensive he got, the angrier he got, the more name calling he got. She's a this, he's a that. And you have to remember, this is super early in our experience. Maz has only even been out of intensive care for 2 or 3 days. I am horrifically sick, barely able to stand in the hall, quite frankly. Not at all certain what the next phase of my life's going to be, if he's going to go to rehab, what we're going to do. And I'm listening to this conversation, and I realize that that could be my life. A constant into the hospital, dry out, can you come pick him up, go home, start the process again. That I could just be on a loop like this forever, because how do you get out of this? And that legacy terrified me. I mean, just truly chilled my blood. I just couldn't imagine. How old were you?
47.
So I was 44
No, I was
years.
46. I
So,
was
okay.
just before
Oh, right,
the
right before your
47th
47th birthday. So I'm 43 years old. I have 44, I guess. I have no idea if I'm going to live, I'm going to live this life until he dies. It was terrible. And I think about that man a lot, because how does his family talk about him?
Yeah. What's his legacy?
What's his legacy? He left a terrible burden on them.
Yeah, that's where you got to think about this too. Is, again, how lucky we were. I mean, we've got some fantastic friends, and they've been fantastic to us too. But I've gone through rehab once, and hopefully will only go through rehab once. So I think a lot of people will be more forgiving to someone who puts you through that once. But what if you do it 5 or 6, 7, a dozen times? That's your legacy. No one's going to care, because you've done it. You've put people in such a bad place so many times, and even if it isn't your fault, that's how your legacy
Yes.
will develop.
Yes. So I think the question today, it really is just, how can you start today to lay the groundwork for the legacy that you want? That what if heaven and hell is what Julie's religion teacher said it was, which is just the way you're talked about. One of the great joys of my life was when we went to Ireland 3 years ago. And Maz talks about his dad like he is almost the second coming. And so he's been gone 21 years, 22? It'll be 22.
Yeah, it'll be 22.
And when we went to Ireland, and everybody started to talk about his dad, his in-laws and his nieces and nephews, they all talked about him the exact same way. And I realized that this wasn't Maz painting a rose-colored image of this man I never got to meet. This was who he was. Well, what finer heaven could that be than 20 years later, the people who knew him best to still be talking about the incredible legacy that he left. So, we all get to pick it to some extent. Pick to have people speak about you in that way. Leave something for others to admire and strive for and miss, not to curse and wish they had avoided.
It is an interesting point to bring up, and it is an interesting thing to mention. If you're in the initial stages of your recovery, it's now you can build a new legacy.
Yeah.
It's what you do next that's going to define what's going to happen to you. And don't be afraid of failing either. I mean, once we talked about this before, it might even be worth mentioning it again at some point, the difference between a lapse and a relapse.
Oh, yep.
If you take it as a learning experience, and you just then get up and you put one foot in front of the other and you keep going as best you can.
Yep.
That will be your legacy.
Yes, striving.
It's
amazing.
It's
an
great
incredible
legacy to
quality.
have.
So have a great day. Think about the end of your life and how you want to be remembered, and then work to live how you want to be remembered. All right, everybody, have a great day.
Have a great day. See you tomorrow.
Bye.